how many people are on boards of directors that are actually really schooled in market access? If the sales force doesn't find you and or your function as a true value add to them or them doing their job, they're going to kind of shut you out, right? Small company, the thing we always say is you're flying the plane and you're building it at the same time.
Welcome to BioPharma Unscripted with Marcus Metcalfe, bringing you real conversations with the leaders, innovators, and challengers transforming biotech and pharma today.
Let's learn a bit about you if we can. And we've obviously known each other, sort of a couple of years now on and off, but could you just take us through a snapshot of your career and what's brought you here today?
Yeah. So, first, thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm certainly looking forward to the conversation. As I said, I've never done a podcast before, and certainly love to talk about market access in the pharmaceutical industry. That's sort of what I do every day. So I enjoy it. I've been in the industry about 20 years. I actually started in 2005 with my first manufacturer, which was a small oncology company based in Minnesota. But before that, for about 5 years, I was really a policy consultant, doing some policy reimbursement things for the industry as well. And then worked for my first manufacturer, as I said, 2005, small company. We were purchased and acquired by AZI, and moved the family from Minnesota to northern New Jersey, which is where I'm originally from. Worked at AZI for a number of years, and then sort of took a path, right, as every company went through the evolution of their drug launches, their building, they're losing drugs off patent, sort of seen the evolution of a lot of things with companies, and went from AZI to Bayer. And then after a small stint at Bayer, which was the largest big pharma company I was ever in, I've been in small companies ever since, and I've really come to love the idea of building a small company to the extent it's possible from the ground up, right? Because what you hope everywhere you go is you hope you take what you've learned in the previous place, even things you've done well, and you try to even improve upon them. And then you also take the things you didn't do as well, right? And you learn from them, so you try and improve upon them in the next place. And I think that's what I certainly love about small companies is the ability to influence the commercialization process and have that voice as early as possible.
Yeah. I was going to say, looking at your profile, you've had a lot of small companies, which for me is great because most of my client base are small, emerging biotechs to mid-size. I'm not, I just don't do much with big pharma anymore. But you've had, I'd say, more than the majority of people, and without having that sort of big pharma perspective, that's great. So I guess. You just touched on that, but in terms of the actual appeal of a small pharma, what is it that gets you? Is it, for me, when I talk to people, I guess it's a feel. I know that's quite fluffy to say, but I've got to think if I'm recruiting for them, I've got to get excited about it. I've got to kind of feel the thing. But what is it that kind of has kept you on this path?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not for everybody. Right. Yeah. So the one thing about small companies that you got to get very, very comfortable with, and it may not be for everybody, as I said, is the risk, right? There's certainly risk across every pharmaceutical company, but there's maybe heightened risk in smaller companies because you're dependent on one drug, hopefully getting through the clinical trial process and reporting positive data, and then hopefully getting through the FDA, where at a larger, bigger pharma company, you have a platform of products. So where you may have a fail one area, you may have a success in others. I think, to be honest, looking back on my career, Marcus, because other people have asked me this question before, because I've been in so many small companies, I think there was no pattern to it or rhyme or reason. I think it's because I started in small.
Yeah.
Right. Well, traditionally in the era I started, and it's certainly not 100%, many people have started on the sales side for a bigger pharma company, carried the bag, and then sort of navigated their way through their career, whichever path they have chosen. I started small, right? So the company I started with in Minnesota, we were your typical biotech, not profitable until we actually were purchased. We had less than 300 total FTEs, probably even less than that. right?
Brilliant.
So I saw the appeal of the small company and truly
Mm.
having the impact. And I think if you know me a little bit, but those who know me well would tell you, if you tell me in a big pharma company, right, hey, here's your sandbox, you got to play in it.
Yeah.
That's just not my personality. So it just
No.
doesn't fit me.
No. No. So you're a bit of a maverick then, but I guess from what you're saying, like, you didn't maybe know any different as well, because you're
No.
right. I mean, I can reflect on that. I started with a small recruitment company, and then I worked for J. I was a rep, so I worked for J&J
Mhm.
for 3 years, and my eyes were like, wow, this is. I mean, I was seriously impressed.
Yeah.
We were whisked off to Dubai and then New York and Boston. We had some great conferences. So I kind of, but then at that point, I was like, actually, it's great, but for me, the impact was minimal. I kind of just felt I didn't really have that purpose, that drive. So,
Right.
okay. So the other thing we touched on before this is looking at, apart from the environment of the companies, is some of the people that have maybe shaped you over the career. And there's a couple of people you mentioned, Dave, Mike, Melinda. Um, so interested to touch on that if we can, about some of those key people, who they are, what is it they brought to you.
Yeah, so I've actually been fortunate. I've also had, as everybody has, right, where it didn't go as well. But I've been very fortunate to have
Mm,
some great mentors and actual direct bosses in my career. And as I've mentioned, the first company I worked for, right, the company in Minnesota, the first boss I had was a guy by the name of Dave Moline, who I've become personal friends with. He taught me just about everything I know in the industry, right? And the CEO there was also a guy who helped me a lot as well, because the thing I said before was sort of a big X, if you will, or a question mark, maybe is a better way to say it, about me when I entered my first manufacturer. I never carried the bag. I wasn't a
yeah.
sales rep. So I
Okay.
didn't understand, as you understood in your career, right? Because you did carry the bag. What is it like to be a sales rep? How do you
Yeah.
manage it? How do you interact with physicians? How do you do your job on a day to day basis? I had no appreciation of that. So both of them, gave me great advice, which I took to heart, which was spend as much time in the field as possible to get to
Mm,
truly learn them, right? Because if the sales force doesn't find you and or your function as a true value add to them or them doing their job, they're going to kind of shut you out, right? It makes your job a little bit harder. So Dave and this former CEO there were very helpful with that. I did a lot. Dave was also very good in giving me more and more as I continued to show that, I knew what I was talking about and would be a
mm.
value for the company. He would always give me more things. And then when I got to the medicines company, and then Melinta as well, because Melinta purchased the medicines company, a guy by the name of Mike McGuire, who was my boss there, who was the chief commercial officer for the infectious disease franchise at both Medco and Melinta. He was a guy who knew everything about antibiotics because I knew nothing about it. I grew up sort of in oncology, and he
Okay.
taught me everything in that space, and then also showed me a lot because he had been around the industry a long time, as I always joke with him. So yeah, I've been very lucky in having some really good mentors to help me navigate through my career in pharma.
I think the thing I always find with, there's mentors, and then I guess that crosses over and can be the same person is the sponsor as well. Because, if we, I know we're just going to get into market access a little bit more, but, for me, that's a key one, is what's the buy-in of these companies, particularly with some of the small companies. The issue can be you've got maybe quite a science heavy guys that have set it up. It's their baby. It's very exciting. Maybe they've never commercialized before. So is that a fair point? You've got to look at the C-suite and people above to see, what is their, how realistic is their ambition in terms of supporting a function such as market access?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think as you and I have talked just back and forth about a few things, that I also think is a bit of a success, right? Is when looking at an executive leadership team, when any person in market access, not just myself, right? So my advice to them would be, and I've given this to others, and hopefully they found it valuable as a mentor relationship too, is say, when you're looking at small companies, right, what you try to do is try to minimize that risk as much as possible.
Yeah.
So part of doing that is to say, one, how experienced is the executive leadership team in actually commercializing a drug? How
Mm.
experienced from a small company perspective? Because it is
Yeah.
different than a larger company, right? It's there's a lot of things that are same, absolutely, but there's some different attributes to it.
Yeah.
How successful are they in raising money? Right, those are things that you hopefully can de-risk. You can't do anything about the clinical trial. You can't do anything about that program and whether or not it hits its endpoint. But you can de-risk some of these things, which are maybe not in your control, but you're looking to the executive leadership. And then the last one is
Mm.
how much importance or how do they value the role of market access? Where do they see it within their commercial leadership team? Are they giving it a strong voice at the table? How involved is market access? Because what you have are a lot of people traditionally, and I do think it's changing, certainly in the last few years. I think people's eyes are opening up much more around the importance of market access and getting
Mm.
it much more involved because how the US market is evolving and becoming more and more complicated every day.
Yeah.
You have a lot of CEOs that have traditionally done what we talked about earlier, right? They started as
Yeah.
sales reps and they came through and were very successful. And then they went to marketing or they went to BD and they've done a number of things and wore many different hats as they went along on their journey to get to the executive leadership team or CEO, right? But the question is, how many of them have actually spent time understanding market access, right?
Yeah.
Most of them are very well schooled on sales and marketing, right? Because traditionally that's sort of where they grew up from.
Yeah.
But what is their level of knowledge around market access? How important is it to them? How
Mm.
involved will that market access person be in the day to day? So I think
Yeah.
those are some key things that are really important.
That's the reason I was interested in that because as you know, I post a lot on LinkedIn, and I think my second biggest post, the first one was just I'm starting my new business, but the second one was actually about the chief access officer and the lack of it. There's Christoph Gleisner. That's about it that I'm aware of. Anyway, I mean, other people might have that. So I think but for me, the point is, well, what is the power and status of that? It's all very well having the title, but the fact so many people jumped on that, it's
Yeah.
clearly a big issue. So you're right. Um,
Yeah.
so moving to, I guess, launching products in some of these smaller companies, um, you've got a few under your belt now. So what can you walk us through the mindset and just practically what you need to be thinking about a small company approaching its, maybe its first launch, probably its first launch. What does that look like on the ground, and what challenges did you face as well doing that?
Yeah. So this is where the rubber hits the road, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't create this line, but someone did. Whoever did, I give them the credit. I just don't know who is in a small company. The thing we always say is you're flying the plane and you're building it at the same
Yep.
time, right? So whoever came up with that, I think it's absolutely great because that is absolutely the truth. So you're building your overall strategy as you're getting prepared to launch, and that comes with all of the things, right? What's your market size? Where's your sales force sizing? What's your competition?
Hmm.
What are you thinking about pricing? All of those things that you're thinking about, but at the same time you also now have to build your infrastructure,
Yeah.
right? So you have to hire your people and you got to build things like your 3PL, your trade and distribution channel, your SOPs that involve that, your government price reporting, your SOPs that involve that. So as I said earlier, right, launching a drug is the same in both companies, but the activities might be different because if you go to a big pharma, as you're preparing to launch and thinking about all those same questions, right? What's the size of the market? What's your competition? What does coverage look like? What's your potential pricing? What's your discounting? All that. The 3PL is built in these other companies. Your government price reporting is built. Your
Yeah.
infrastructure is built. It's not built there. So you have to do both of those things at the same time, which gets into how important is market access because of those things I just mentioned, you can't accomplish those things in 6 months, right?
Yeah.
It takes a while. So when you ask about
Hmm.
what is the good and what is the bad, well, the good
Yeah.
is to the extent possible, and money is always a consideration,
Yeah.
and I'm sensitive to that. The earlier you get a market access person in, the better for everything, right?
Hmm.
Because all of these things, from your 3PL to your all of your SOPs governing your process, to your patient services, which are critical,
Yeah.
especially in this day and age, right? All the SOPs and business rules around that, those take significant time and often are underestimated if the
Okay.
executive leadership team doesn't have the knowledge of it.
And and I mean that phrase of getting market access in place early is such a common, it's never early enough. I hear it all the time, but yet it keeps happening. So define for us, if you will, what is early enough, at what stage in the drug development process, and also just kind of what that journey looks like in terms, is there stuff you can do at phase one? What obviously, we're kind of coming up to phase three is where most of the stuff's going on, but could you just walk us through, in terms of where the drug is in its commercialization process, what needs to happen?
Yeah, sure. I think in an ideal world, someone who's there at least 24 months before launch, right? Potential launch.
Okay.
If earlier is even better, again, in ideal world, because if you have someone who has some level of knowledge of the HEOR activities, which you and I've talked about in the past as well, they can maybe have some input into what are some of the things we might be measuring as outcomes related to the clinical trial, or what is going to be our real world program as we launch? Are we going to have a real world program? Are we going to have an EAP program as the clinical trial is going on? And what type of data are we going to launch? Or what type of data are we going to collect for launch? So I think those are ideal, right? 2+ years. But again, most companies are thinking about and completely understand and I'm sympathetic to. They're thinking about the finances, right? They're very focused on getting the clinical trial up and running, which is very costly, getting it through, getting the database locked. And then, okay, now let's start thinking about commercial because now we'll file, blah, blah, blah. But I think the latest, if you really want to do it right, is 18 months because the building of your 3PL, depending upon what distribution model, trade model you want, you have to get your state licensure in some states, and that takes time. You have to apply for license in about 35+ states out there. That all takes time. Your patient services, right? That all takes time. So I think 18 months is very good. That's sort of the minimum to in my mind. If you can do it earlier, because then that gives that person at least a little bit of say, involvement in some of the data that may come out of the clinical trial and what does real world data, what does an EAP program, if you're going to launch, look like, which is all very helpful for the commercialization process.
Yeah. So when you've been in those situations, I imagine there's different scenarios where you're coming in to build and expand market access. Can you just share some of your insights about maybe some of the internal conversations? Because I imagine there's some people in there that are not a fan of market access. They don't get it. So who's kind of the greatest protagonist here? Who are you sort of coming up against? And with those people, how are you, I guess, persuading them that Ray knows best?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've always taken that challenge of education on as just something that's part of the job, part of the role. And to your point, if it's something that as a market access professional you don't enjoy, in terms of trying to educate people, there may be a different career for you.
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's across the board. I've always had
Really?
to.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always had to work to educate people to internally, but I've been lucky in the sense that most of the people are interested in what we're talking about, right? They actually want to learn because if you've spent time in the US market, all you got to do is pick up the paper, read anything on the internet, look at social media, look at the TV, and you can see all the things that are constantly changing within the healthcare. And then what's always really interesting is they're also consumers of healthcare at the same time, right? So that's a lever I've always pulled or pushed upon, is to say, well, let's take your own personal example, right? When you go to the doctor, what happens, right? What happens with you when you get prescribed medicine and it gets sent to your CVS or a specialty pharmacy, whatever it may be? What happens, right? And then you start to see the interest peak in them because now you're personalizing it
It's
for them.
personal.
And then
Yeah.
you can say, okay, now let's take your personal experience, which isn't maybe too far than what we're trying to do here, and understand that everything that you're talking about, right? When your drug gets sent to the specialty pharmacy and then gets shipped to your house, how do you think that happens? Did that just miraculously happen? No, there has to be an infrastructure that allows that. If there's a prior authorization on your drug, who do you think handles that? There's an infrastructure behind the scenes that you're just not aware about
Hmm.
that is doing that entire process to make sure that that drug is delivered to your home through a specialty pharmacy on a Monday or Tuesday, right? And then they sort of understand it a lot more, because you make it a little more personal. I've always
Yeah.
had some success with that.
Yeah. And you touched on HEOR before,
Mhm.
and I'm interested how that marries with you. You're not a health economist, but HEOR and market access to me are hand in hand in terms of two sides of the same coin. I think, to me, I find that access people have kind of got an advantage in that a lot have come from a commercial background, and therefore they may be more akin to, maybe they've got those uh, more sort of tuned communication styles as well. But so in terms of you working with the HEOR, you mentioned some of the real world evidence and sort of clinical outcomes assessment work as well. How has that fit with you, HEOR, in some of these startups you've worked with?
Absolutely critical. It's in my opinion probably one of the most important partnerships that market access team will have. Um, the level of importance will only increase depending upon how competitive the market is you're launching.
Yeah.
Right? If you happen to be lucky enough to be a first drug or first entrant in a brand new class or a class of drugs,
Mm.
or a drug that doesn't exist, it's a little bit different for you, right? You have to navigate maybe other things. But if you're trying to launch a new drug in a crowded class that may have some mature brands,
Mm-hmm.
and what is that value to either the patient, the system, the payer, the physicians? Those are the key questions. So I've always been a big proponent, and I've always looked to partner with the HEOR people. As you said, I'm not a health economist. I have a great appreciation for it,
Mm.
and my appreciation just developed over the years when sitting in front of commercial payers, sitting in front of physicians, and that became the question, right?
Yeah.
What truly is the value of the drug? And that's always the interesting question, right? Which is what intrigues me about HEOR not being a health economist. Values defined differently by everyone, right? What's valuable to you may be completely valuable to me. What's
Mm-hmm.
valuable to a patient may be completely valuable, different value than to the caretaker of that patient, right? A lot of diseases have caretakers.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we define value? And those internal discussions as you're preparing for launch, I find them very, very intriguing.
Mm.
A couple of years ago, again, because I've had bosses who've been actually open to ideas and flexible with things. Um, I propose, because I've seen it differently in many places, where HEOR typically is a medical function, and it's appropriate that it's there. But
Now
what
that's a
typically
controversial one, Ray.
I understand it, right,
Yeah.
for a variety of compliance
Okay,
reasons,
but that's
but
your view. It's in medical.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But what I had said was, and this is where it gets maybe a good balance, is I had said, hey, every market access function typically has the payer marketing as a part of their team.
Yeah.
Why don't we make this payer marketing person also someone who understands, who is a health economist, right?
Mm.
So you make it HEOR, value based medicine, and payer marketing. You combine it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the controversial thing, to your point, and I agree with you, right, is the medical affairs team is doing their great work, which they usually do. And then once you get close to launch and they've defined the value, they sort of throw it over the
Yeah.
wall to the commercial side and say, okay,
Yeah.
now here's the information, here's the data. You guys figure out how you want to message this. And I said,
Yeah.
that to me doesn't
Mm.
make the best sense. Why don't we have someone who could really understand the data, who is a health
Yeah.
economist,
Yeah.
partnering with medical affairs and coming up with those messages so that at launch or even prior, right, we have them ready to go for the various audiences we're trying to engage.
Yeah.
And I think that has worked well. And there's also been, I
I'd agree with that.
believe,
Yeah.
a pretty good way to balance to your point, the controversy of where does HEOR fit?
Yeah. I think it's yeah, there was a post bio, someone had put a post about, where does it sit, because it does
Yeah,
it does dot about, I've seen in finance,
it
clinical,
does.
And but I think the overriding point of that article was that perhaps there's an onus on HEOR to step up and to put themselves in the shoes of the other functions, and perhaps because I know this is a stereotype, but I just from the responses that I saw on that, if someone's coming from an academic background, I'm not saying everyone is more academic in that space, but you have to be able to lift yourself up out of your space and think of the shoes someone else is walking in to get it. And if you can do that, then you're in a better position to build that collaboration.
Yeah, 100% correct. It's no different than what was told to
Yeah,
me by early on in my career, right? Is, hey, you've never carried the bag. You're not going
yeah,
to
exactly.
understand what a sales rep
Yeah,
deals with unless you spend time with them.
yeah,
And it's not being critical. It's just knowing what you don't know. And yes, a lot of the HEO people who are health economists, super smart people,
yeah,
but they haven't seen the customer facing side
yeah, yeah.
as much or at all. And they don't understand the type of questions that either your account team, your sales
Mm,
reps, and others who are customer
mm-hmm,
facing. And those customers are nurses, physicians, any one of the payers. The messages need to be honed in
mm,
specifically for those audiences to truly define what is the value of the product.
yeah. Because I
Yeah.
think from the payer's point of view, you've got to think about what they're going to be receptive to as well. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me that a health economist would be more in tune, potentially because I know I used to be a rep. I probably showed a lot on personality and just
Sure.
friendly guy, but my level of knowledge was it was sufficient. But
Yep.
could I go into a deep clinical discussion? I think that got better in the role of. I mean, we're going back 20 years now, so
Yeah.
the level of discussions got deeper. But you're right. A health economist coming to that from a payer point of view, credibility level is increased. So
Yep.
okay. Um,
Yep.
Keen to learn then about some lessons that you've seen. It's always interesting to look at mistakes and disasters, and what I'm interested to sort of learn from this discussion about your advice. With maybe some of the scenarios you've seen which haven't gone well. Do you have any particular side around market access where it doesn't have to be a car crash, but to learn from you about when it hasn't gone right, what the consequences are.
Yeah, this is where
Do
the
we need
rubber hits
longer?
the yeah. Yeah, we could take a long time on this one. But this is goes back to the point I was making before, which is how important is market access going to be in the function, and what is your voice? Where are you going to be at the commercial table when coming up with all of the inputs that are going to define success, right? So the inputs are, what's the forecast? Right? Are we just thinking of forecast because we're doing share, we're doing competitive capture somewhere? Are we expanding the market? Whatever it is. But if the market access person, assuming they're good, is not in the room, there to make sure that the considerations of the access value of that are part of that discussion, that's where it goes wrong. So, for example, right?
All right.
If you're just thinking about, well, yeah, this we're going to launch, and let's say it's not a first in class drug, right? It's a somewhat of a competitive market. Let's say two entrants in it, and you're the third, right? So what does the uptake curve look like? That's always a great debate, right? So where is the forecast? And people are always talking about month one, 0 to 3, 6 to or 3 to 6, 6 to 9, and your first 12, and then out, right? How fast do you get to peak share? All those type of questions that everyone talks about. Well, the question is that's often left out in previous lives is, well, what does coverage look like, right?
Okay.
So from 0 to 3 months, you're making an assumption you're going to capture X, whatever that X is. Does your coverage assumption match that, right? So from your payers, who's actually covering you? What does coverage look like? Is it PA? Is it medical exception? Is it open coverage, right? What's the contracting strategy? The people who are already in the market, they already have X share. They're not
Yeah.
just going to lie down and say there's another entrant, unless unless there's a serious or significant clinical differentiation that they just can't compete with, which we've all seen that happen in the marketplace. And that's wonderful for patients, because at the end of the day, that's what this is about, the patients. But it's those type of considerations. And then where does price fit in, right?
Price.
So every, everyone
Just
wants
happens,
premium.
doesn't it?
Everyone wants premium price. No one doesn't want premium price. So,
Yeah.
but where does that fit? And how does that affect uptake? How does that affect payer coverage? How does that affect payer perceptions? How does that come across in your value proposition? Right. So it's those things where I've seen it, unfortunately, too many times, where after 3 months, after 6 months, after 9 months, you look back and you say, well, wait a second, our forecast was X, and by X I'm meaning here,
Hmm.
and our units are here. Where did we go wrong? Right. What happened? And it's certainly not the
Okay.
clinical. You got an FDA approved drug. You got a
They're
value
clean.
proposition
Yeah.
for it. So where did we go wrong? Well, typically it's because of the assumptions, and typically it's because many times that voice of the market access
Hmm.
person might not have been either in the room or valued, right? So
Hmm.
maybe they were in the room or valued. And again, it's not that market access is any more important than any other function. It's not. I want to make that clear. They're all important, right? As I try to tell my relatives every year when they come over, when they always ask me, what do you actually do? And I say, well, none of them are in pharma, so they always wonder, right? So I say, take a
Market
big
access.
500
Yeah.
piece, 1,000 piece puzzle set, put that together, and every piece has to
Yeah.
fit from
Yeah.
your clinical, right, from your clinical development to your clinical trials to your medical affairs to your
Yeah.
commercial, which all has to fit. And if it doesn't fit, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Um, but it's understanding what is an extremely complicated, fragmented market, to navigate that, and how fast you can navigate that. What are your strategies to navigate that, right? This market is just not what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I jokingly was joking with some people, a couple of months ago, and I said, because we're all talking about it now, and I said, think about it, right? 3 years ago, the phrase IRA, right, outside of other political things, wasn't in anyone's
Yeah.
vocabulary in the U.S.
Yeah.
Now you can't look on the social media without hearing IRA, right?
Mm.
Just 3 years ago, 4 years ago, no one talked about it until it was
Mm.
passed into law by President Biden.
Yeah.
Right? No one talked about it. So now that was something that no one even foresaw, and it completely changes your market. It
Yeah.
has everyone in pharma figuring things out differently, or trying to do
Hmm.
things differently than what we were doing just 1 day, 2 days, 3 months before IRA.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's the thing. So the complications I've seen is because those voices aren't heard,
Yeah.
or they're even not in the room.
They're not
And I
invited.
think
Yeah.
yeah, they're not invited. They're just not invited. And I
Have
think what you're
Have you
seeing.
had
Oh, go
that?
ahead. No, please,
So
please. Oh,
to
absolutely. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you've not been, because I've heard this a few times. I mean, either, I guess, for me, there's a certain point where, you're kind of Doctor Doom sometimes, because everyone's getting excited about, oh, we've got this forecast, the investors are loving, and then, Ray's coming in with the reality. May not be you, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
But, sometimes when you go down a road and you're getting excited, pride gets in the way sometimes. You've got investors want to hear something and you want to go with the story. So
Yep.
why aren't people involved? Is it because they don't get it, or they just kind of, there's a bit of pride maybe?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. I've seen it. I've seen it where some don't get it, and again, I think it's because it's not that they don't. I did not get it. It's they don't have they don't appreciate it as much as maybe they should, right? They
Yeah.
get it, right? They understand market access as a function. They understand they need it. They understand that there's a trade and distribution component and a patient services, but the sensitivity
Mm.
around it, meaning that appreciation, right? Like just think about it. And I've not had this experience, but just think about the consolidation of payers.
Yeah.
Now, because of that consolidation, if one payer, think about from a market access metric, hey, we're doing great on overall coverage. We've gotten so many plans covering us, right? But we're struggling with one PBM. Think about it, just one, where 15 years
Right.
ago, if you said one PBM, your coverage would have been really good, right? You'd be like, wow, we got really, that one PBM, hypothetically speaking, could be 60, 70, 80, depending upon the PBM, 60, 70, 80 million commercial lives in the US. Think about that. So you've done a great job everywhere else, but you got one PBM for whatever reason, right? And
Mm.
we don't know. I can't shutting you out, right? Or not covering you. That's 80 million, 70 million, 60 million commercial lives.
Wow.
That's a big problem because of the consolidation, right? So this,
Mm.
again, the sensitivity around just one
Mm.
shutting you out could be a major
Yeah.
obstacle for your commercial launch success. And I think markets, it's slowly changing, but I think it's still going to
Yeah.
take some time. When you look at boards of directors across pharmaceutical companies, right? I think you see a lot of people, certainly the scientists, absolutely, that's above and beyond my knowledge. But how many people are on boards of directors that are actually really schooled in market access?
Mm.
How many?
Not a
How
lot.
many?
I don't know.
That's
It's
a,
slim.
that's to me, when you got people at that, when you get people at that board level now,
Mm.
right? So now you're starting to see a lot of companies way more sensitive than they ever used to be around
Yeah.
market access and CEOs and CCOs, which
Yeah.
is, I think,
Uh,
is fantastic
And the
for all of
VC
us.
guys, they're much more tuned in now, whereas it was just,
Exactly.
it was open
Yep.
before, wasn't it?
And I think IRA did some of that because everyone had to
Yeah.
go back and do GTN modeling and other things, right? Because
Mm.
GTNs were sort of had to change after the IRA.
Yeah.
But then, okay, how are we penetrating boards from market access, right? How many of those board members have actually, again, going all the way back to when I started my career, I've never done sales, so I need to spend time learning it.
Yeah.
How many people at that board level have actually sat across a payer and negotiated a payer contract? Because it's not that simple.
No.
It's not nearly as simple as you think, right? How many people have actually sat in one of the largest IDNs in the country and tried to negotiate access in a large IDN, right? And understand that this IDN is also aligned with the payer, and
Hmm.
how does that all work, right? It's
Yeah.
all of those intricacies
Yeah.
that have complicated this market. And I think the more people at that upper level who know that, the better it's going to be, where
Yeah.
that voice will then get heard at the lower levels.
And in terms of achieving that, and that's around greater awareness, doing podcasts on the topic maybe, and I guess highlighting, but yeah, seriously, there's not a lot out there, is there? When you and I talked before, in terms of the function we both work in, it's still got a way to go to increase
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, I think the good thing is it's absolutely changed. Like someone sent, I think you may have posted it first, and then I saw a bunch of people send it to me saying there was an article written by a couple of folks saying that market access is the hardest job in pharma. And
I was this the one a couple of weeks ago,
yeah,
or there was like
it sort
10
of made its
lessons.
way.
I don't know if that was one.
Yeah,
I tagged you in
it's
that because it just exploded, and I look out for
yeah,
those articles because loads of like really senior people wanted to say, what about this? What about that? It was great.
right. Right. And a couple of people were asking me, what do I, and I said, that's not for me to decide, right? That's for someone else
Yeah,
to decide. Do I think it's a
yeah,
very hard job? Yeah. Do I think it's harder than it
yeah,
was 10 years ago? Sure.
yeah,
But everything in pharma is extremely difficult, right?
yeah,
There's no job or function that to me is any more important. I think the best, so we talked about the areas where we can improve.
hmm,
I think the best companies are the ones who have all of the critical functions around the table. You sit in a room and you figure it all out, and everyone
yeah,
has an appreciation for each other's function, for each other's voice, for each other's lens, because everyone's coming at it with a
yeah,
different
yeah,
lens.
yeah,
The marketing team's looking at it maybe a little bit different than the market access team, and that's a good thing, right? Because
hmm,
if you have those level of discussion going all the way up, right, which is why the more people at that executive level and board level who have an appreciation for
yeah.
it,
They're
then
open
you're
to it,
going
then, aren't they?
then you're going to come out with the best logical
Mm,
conclusion, the best plan forward, the best commercial strategy, right? That's the good in the small company.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask as we wrap it up in terms of your feelings on the function of market access for the future. and where you see it going, and I guess your feeling about it as well, because it's, it's obviously it's not a great feeling in the world right now. There's a ton of redundancies that have happened, as we touched on before the call, which kind of, I don't think it's happened to that scale before in terms of hitting HEOR and market access. That hasn't, I haven't seen that in the 15, 16 years I've been recruiting in that space. But maybe on, on a positive note, give us some hope, Ray. Where do you see it going here, and some of the positive trends that you think we should be looking out for?
Well, I mean, the positive trends to me are, I think the level of importance will just continue in the world of market access, right? I think its status within companies, its voice within companies, whatever phrase you want to use there, will continue to rise. I think everything that comes out of Washington, D.C., right, the policy aspects, whether or not you have most favored nation, what's happening at the FDA, all those things, those are things you got to keep an eye on, right? So as I try to predict the future, of which I'm not good at,
I mean, it's tough trying to predict what's coming out of Washington.
It's very tough, right? Most favored nation. So you'll continue to have the discussions around that and what impact it will have. The discussions around pricing, patient access. Because at the end of the day, I think what's important in all this is, we're all doing this to hopefully bring great assets, drugs to the market for the patients.
That's the point.
Right?
That's the point. Surely,
that's the whole point. And that's the access, right? So no matter how good the asset is, if the patient doesn't have access to it, well, then nobody is benefiting. Nobody. But I think the future is bright, right? I think market access, patient access, pricing, the policy changes, what's happening at the FDA, the consolidation in the U.S. market, right? Those issues are just going to continue to rise and become more important as you're launching your drugs, right? Things like 340B and what's happening with 340B and the debate surrounding that, right? Market access is sort of in the center of all of that. And a good market access person needs to understand all of these pieces and how all of these pieces affect, your commercial launch access strategy, right? All of that.
Well, thank you, Ray. I think that is the perfect way to finish there.
I love talking about these concepts, and hopefully it comes through that take great pride and passion in sort of this function and what we do within pharma companies and how important it is.
It's and that's exactly the goal for me with the podcast, was to learn something, understand more about the function. But I'm in recruitment because I like people and I enjoy the human interaction. I'm really enjoying, through doing the series, actually just learning about the stuff, but not in just a factual way, just the why and the opinions and what goes wrong. It's interesting because everyone's got a different perspective as to why they are where they are, and that's endlessly fascinating. So, Ray Frost, thank you very much. Really genuinely appreciate your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So until next time, I shall sign off.
Thanks for tuning in to BioPharma Unscripted with Marcus Metcalfe. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. Connect with us on LinkedIn to join the discussion and suggest future guests. Until next time, this is Marcus Metcalfe, bringing you the voices transforming biotech and pharma today.